Welcome to the Joe Cohen Show. Join me as I share my experience with biohacking and invite top health experts to explore the latest technology, supplements, research, and resources for optimizing your body and brain. Hey everyone, I'm here with Siobhan Mitchell. Siobhan is quite an interesting guest. She has a lot of experience with a bunch of topics that interest me, like mood, genetics, cognitive function, and mitochondrial health. And she has a lot of experience in terms of academic as well as industry experience. So she studied at the University of Chicago. She was a postdoc fellow at brain aging at the University of Washington. She's also worked for Unilever, Nestle, PepsiCo, and she was working on the effects of nutrition on mood and cognition, exploring the healthomics, combining genomics, metabolomics, and lifestyle for optimal health. She recently worked as a senior director of research at Noom, and she's currently the chief scientific officer of MitoQ, which is a mitochondrial supplement similar to COQ10. And yeah, so she's got quite a few interesting things to talk about. Let's get started with some of your core research over a long time, which was related to mood. I know you studied mood and serotonin, and I'll just kind of intro that with some people. There's been some studies that show that, serotonin doesn't really have an impact on mood, which I don't agree with. And curious what your I don't think you do either, but I'm curious what you think of those studies. That it would be interesting to hear your insights.
Yeah, for sure. And this is where I think the way that people look at serotonin is they just imagine like, oh, you raise serotonin and everything should be fine. But it gets more complicated than that. It's like how you raise it, where are you raising it? And this is, I think, exactly what I've been researching for the last 20 years. And this all started when I was a postdoc at University of Washington at a psychiatry lab. And my boss is actually a psychiatrist. And he was an interesting guy because he dealt with a lot of people who were depressed. And his most go-to kind of therapy were things like electroshock therapy, transcranial magnetic therapy, that is what he would call a reset to the brain. So he always thought that that was a really good way to get people out of depression. And a lot of these serotonin types of drugs, were maybe not as much of a reset as they should be, though some people did actually get effects of it. But anyway, I digress. So the main thing we're really trying to understand in this lab was that, how do people end up getting more risk for depression or anxiety? Where is it coming from in the brain? And we would do these experiments on ourselves to see what kinds of genes we had as a lab group. And one of the genes that we all looked at was a serotonin transporter gene that could put you at risk of depression if you had two short versions of its promoter. And this is, I think, a really well-studied gene. There are countless association studies showing that if you have more stress over your life, you have this particular gene, then you will probably get more depression later on. So we did this experiment in the lab and we tried to keep it all sort of, personally like hush hush. But in fact, it looked like most people in the lab actually had a greater risk for depression. They had two short alleles, including me. And that got me really interested in understanding how serotonin really worked in the brain. And that actually led me to go into industry, because I think industry is a lot faster at finding cures for people. Obviously, I think pharma has its issues, but what I did instead is I went into the food industry, because I feel like food is medicine. Like if you understand what kind of food you're taking over your lifetime, you can prevent a lot of diseases. And I think you agree with that too, right?
Yeah, I think what you said was quite interesting about the serotonin gene. So I also have, I forgot if it was one or two copies of the short allele. I don't remember, but I have one of those serotonin genes, and it was pretty clear just based on a number of genetic pathways that I have that my serotonin system in general wasn't working based on just, a whole bunch of information. And, and that was impacting my mood. And something that I noticed is that really showed when I was under stress or pressure. right? It really came out, meaning if I wasn't pressured, then I would be I'd be relatively calm. When there's like triggers and pressures, that's all of a sudden where I'd feel like I'm melting down. And really the only thing that helped that was actually serotonin. Things that increase serotonin, and I was able to do it in a whole bunch of different ways, but but in general, just increasing serotonin was the answer for me. And then I read these studies where, some group of researchers who don't have experience, in serotonin per se, they look at, some things and like, yeah, there's not really much research showing that serotonin has anything to do with mood, which I think was, and some people were sending it to me. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like there's huge body of research, whether it's on tryptophan, 5-HTP, animals, humans, or SSRIs or this, that, genes and a whole bunch of different pathways and Mendelian randomization studies. Like they all kind of agree that, serotonin one way or another does have an influence on mood. And so I look at these studies and I'm like, whoa, this is ridiculous.
No, I totally agree. And this is where I think, people expect, a very simple explanation of how serotonin should work. And when you look at all these depression studies that kind of said, oh, we looked at all the different types of, antidepressants that affect serotonin and none of them work that well. Well, one, there's obviously a huge placebo effect with depression. So it's really hard to see an effect over the placebo. And two, it really also depends on your genes. And almost none of these studies ever look at people's genes. So I think, all the pharma-led studies just really, I think, kind of dropped the ball on understanding that really early on. And I think pharma is getting better at that, but they're still really slow. It was interesting. So I actually worked on genes that affect B vitamin metabolism. And that was really interesting because I think that's much more well understood that, for instance, if you have the MTHFR genes that, predispose you to less, kind of active folate, that you will be more prone to depression and you will require methylfolate. And that is really well understood. But for, actual sort of serotonin genes and what kind of, treatment you should get, I think that's up in the air. And yeah, as I was telling you earlier, I have an interesting story about how when we tried to understand how to fix people who had that serotonin transporter allele that made them more at risk for depression, we wanted to just give them straight up tryptophan because, as you know, that's the precursor to serotonin. And so we gave that to people who had, that short allele, and we did not get the effect we expected. We actually found that they were much more anxious. And what we found out was that what was going on when tryptophan hit their gut was that most of it was getting shunted to a different pathway from serotonin. They went through the IDO pathway, got turned into kynurenine, and a whole bunch of other factors that are inflammatory. So in fact, we're just causing more inflammation in their gut. And you're probably really aware that more inflammation in your gut, the more likely you're going to have depression. So for instance, IBS and other syndromes like that are also really predisposed to having more depression because of this. So
yeah, I mean, I've pretty much everything you just said, from the MTHFR to the tryptophan to the IBS, I basically went through all that. And I figured this all out based on reading research and also experimenting on myself. So number one is one of the things I know that actually improve my mood, by itself, is high dose methylfolate. And that's mostly because of the serotonin, but also because of it also increases dopamine, but mainly because of the serotonin. And so that's another kind of pathway in which, you take a nutrient, and I think it's really working with serotonin mainly because only the things that really increase serotonin are able to counteract that mood effect with me. Something that you mentioned before, I want you to talk about it more. I noticed that I'm able to read negative emotions and positive emotions much better based
Yeah, and
on
that,
increasing
yeah,
the serotonin.
yeah.
So yeah, basically everything you just said, I kind of experienced in a very intimate way, you could say. You want to hear about the one health hack that is sure to change your life? Okay, here it is. Subscribing to this podcast. 67% of listeners aren't subscribed to the show, so please don't forget to show your support by hitting the subscribe button now. You'll not only be supporting the show, but also investing in yourself and your health journey, all while helping to keep us ad-free.
So I'm interested to hear how you look at whether your serotonergic nutrients are doing their job in terms of lab measurements, because as we talked about earlier, I think one way you can really tell if, your serotonin system is working better is through, looking at these tests that measure your positive versus negative bias, because serotonin has been shown to make people actually be more stimulated and pay more attention to things with positive bias versus negative bias. So people who are depressed, for instance, have a lot of negative bias. They'll focus on, for instance, pictures of people with fearful or angry or disgusted faces, and they'll kind of completely discount or, not really pay as much attention to positive, happy emotions. And so, I think this is a great way for people to test whether, a kind of mood enhancement is working for them. Have you ever tried anything like that? Or what do you do to see if your mood is getting better?
I actually haven't. I think that's really fascinating, and when you told me that, that was really interesting. I would like to do you have any sites that you could look on that, like, that you would recommend for that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I can send you a bunch of them. So there are a
Okay.
whole bunch of things
What would
that
you type in
will
Google, like,
test.
or some search engine? Like,
Yeah, if you
look
just go into Google and you type in like positive bias testing or negative bias testing, you should find, a whole slew of them.
I actually read a study on tryptophan that actually showed that social intelligence actually gets better with tryptophan, with higher tryptophan.
This is kind of what Prozac is really known for, right? So, this is what Prozac had been thought about way back in the day when it was first introduced, is like literally it's like a social cosmetic as well as an antidepressant. So it's interesting that you noticed that. And I'm just kind of curious then, did you notice that with anything that raises your oxytocin? Because I think that would be even more kind of obvious if you're getting more social intelligence from social, yeah, kind of cues like oxytocin.
It's a little harder to know if it's working. I don't know why. It's just I haven't noticed, even though I've read the research, I haven't noticed that kind of benefit where I have noticed that from serotonin. I
That
don't.
is interesting. Yeah, because
It doesn't mean that it doesn't
oxytocin,
occur. It's just
yeah.
that I don't. It wasn't as strong as serotonin, and maybe because, like, I never really did it on a long-term basis, because this is not something that you're like, you take tryptophan, you're like, "Whoa, I could start looking at, positive or negative emotions much better." It's more like you take it, and then after, like, 6 months, you're like, "That's interesting." I started to notice I started to get more socially intelligent and notice more cues. So, it could just be related to that, maybe it does have an impact, but I didn't notice it consciously.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of things can affect your mood. And this brings up like another topic we are discussing earlier that I think is really important, how brain energy can affect mood. And so that's the other area that I think, would be really important for people to be more aware of, is that, there's one, the serotonin system, there's the oxytocin system, there's dopamine. And don't even get me started with dopamine neurons, because you're probably aware of this. Dopamine neurons are actually the most metabolically active and also the most prone to damage, because making dopamine and metabolizing dopamine is something that, is metabolically very taxing for mitochondria. So, for instance, you're probably aware that Parkinson's disease has been thought of as a mitochondrial disease, because all those dopamine neurons start dying off because literally their mitochondria have been overtaxed over a lifetime, and they start dying off sooner. So, yeah, like one of the things that we started understanding when I was at Nestle was that if you can tamp down some areas of the brain in terms of how much, activity your mitochondria are experiencing, that you can actually cure social anxiety in a rodent model. So we used a butyrate type of ketogenic intervention, which is medium chain fatty acids. And so we gave these rats that are socially anxious, they would always get defeated in a fight when you put them into a cage with another rat. Once you gave them the medium chain fatty acids, which then got turned into butyrate, they could actually withstand, the other rat much better. So their social anxiety went away. They kind of actually had more confidence. And another really interesting molecule that goes into that sort of brain energy, helping support mitochondria, is N-acetylcysteine. So I don't know if you take this N-acetylcysteine. Do you? Yeah?
I take everything.
You take everything. There was a really cool study with my old collaborator, Carmen Sandy, that showed when they gave rats N-acetylcysteine, they actually had more motivation to do things. And that is something I have not seen that much. So, I've seen like obviously tons of studies, rodents, improving cognition and, things like learned helplessness and fear. But in terms of motivation, which, as you know, is a dopaminergic kind of system, this is, I think, new. So I'm really intrigued by N-acetylcysteine and how you would measure motivation after taking it for a while. So you'll have to tell me if you notice that kind of thing more. If you kind of go off N-acetylcysteine and then you go on it if you feel like the motivation has changed at all.
It's very interesting. I mean, there's a lot I want to unpack here just based on what we discussed, but it just happens to be that I'm on a round of mega dosing N-acetylcysteine and experimenting to see what effects it has on myself. I mean, I've been taking it for on and off for like 15 years. I tried it, but I went back and forth on N-acetylcysteine because on the one hand, it's an antioxidant, and then you read like studies where antioxidants are not good, right? And then on the other hand, there's some animal studies that show that animals live longer with N-acetylcysteine. Now I have to see like how I want to incorporate it and how it makes most sense. So I'll give you an example. This is another factor. I also take glucosamine sulfate. And one of the animal studies with glucosamine sulfate said that the longevity benefits disappear when you take it with N-acetylcysteine because some of those longevity benefits are from oxidative stress. And so I'm kind of like, okay, how do I take this thing here where like I want to get the benefits of, oxidative stress and working out, and on the other hand, when you're working out, you want some of that oxidative stress, but on the other hand, you don't want too much. So how do you balance that?
I find the thing that you just talked about with antioxidants, are they helping? Are they not? Do you need some, oxidative stress to help your muscles when you're exercising? This is a huge topic, and I have a lot to say on that. So what I
Please
think
do.
is going on, oh yeah, what I do is that oxidative stress, for sure can be good. It helps with, keeping your muscles maintained and all the rest. But I would say oxidative stress, especially around the mitochondria, can be super bad. And this happens more and more as you age, that you have, oxidative stress that goes beyond anything beneficial. And so I think anyone after like age 35 has to start thinking about oxidative stress as something they have to, take care of. But a lot of antioxidants, I would say, are really untargeted. You take like vitamin C or selenium, and it's just going everywhere, and it's maybe not going the right places. I feel like the mitochondrially targeted antioxidants make a lot more sense. And so N-acetylcysteine is one of those that actually I think ends up in the mitochondria more. And, funnily enough, I'm not going to plug my company too much, but as you just mentioned, I'm the CSO of
Plug
MitoQ.
away.
And and MitoQ, I would say, is the only mitochondrially targeted antioxidant that you can get as a supplement. So it has got this special tag on it, this triphenylphosphonium tag, that makes it go straight to the mitochondria like nothing else. And so then you can take care of oxidative stress. And we have numerous studies showing that you can help with exercise recovery. You can actually improve exercise power. And so all those things that you're just talking about, like, oxidative stress is sometimes good. What we've shown is with MitoQ, having MitoQ on board while you're exercising only helps take care of the oxidative stress so that your muscles can actually do a better job in terms of recovery and also performance during especially like very active, very sort of high power types of things like time trials. So yeah, that's my plug on oxidative stress. I think they got a little bit of a buzz of like, oh, people who take vitamin C, this is actually preventing some of the benefits of exercise. Vitamin C goes everywhere, but something like MitoQ, it does not. And that's what makes it a much more effective thing for that kind of, yeah. And I think it's different for everyone. I mean, we just talked earlier about how, obviously it helps if you're a little older, past age 30, 35, because COQ10 starts going down after that age.
Right.
And then, genes that might interact with COQ10 levels. So, you might have particular genes that make it so you're more vulnerable to CoQ10 deficiency. And so then you might feel the effect right away, like in the first week or so. We've had lots of people say that they felt something from MitoQ in a week. And actually, one of the things, this is an anecdote, complete anecdote, people start saying they have really vivid dreams on MitoQ. I don't know if you noticed any vivid dreams. I know this is 10 years ago.
I wouldn't
Hard to
remember.
remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's because MitoQ is more brain bioavailable than CoQ10. So, CoQ10 has a lot of trouble getting into the brain, and MitoQ doesn't actually. So we're
Yeah.
in the
And
middle of doing.
we do have a report on self-decode that you could see your predisposition for COQ10. And so you could see if you have lower or higher levels of COQ10, or what your need is. And if you definitely have lower levels, I mean, it's a supplement that I think that if you have certain things, you might want to take it anyway. Like, I could bring up my notes on that, just on the topic.
Yeah,
But
it makes sense to me. I mean, I think for sure it's one of those ones that, if you're concerned about aging, you should just take it as a matter of course, CoQ10 or MitoQ or something like that. Because there's some
right.
nutrients or, endogenous kind of pseudonutrients like CoQ10 that go down when you're aging and people don't realize it, so you need to kind of keep those up to deal with all that oxidative stress, which will go up and up and up as you age. And there's nothing you can do about it. We have one study right now that I think is really cool where they're giving MitoQ to women who are postmenopausal. And yeah, you might realize this, you probably do. Estrogen is actually really good at helping mitochondria deal with oxidative stress. And once you lose that estrogen, that kind of rejuvenating effect of estrogen, literally the heart health effects of exercise go way, way down. So all those heart health benefits, helping with like aortic stiffness and stuff like that, like almost completely disappear in postmenopausal women. And so the MitoQ kind of intervention will be really about like, oh, if you don't have estrogen on board, can you actually make exercise beneficial by dealing with the oxidative stress through this mechanism, through a MitoQ mechanism? Because your estrogen's not going to do its job anymore. So I think there's tons of, moments that you can look at aging and realize like you have to deal with it or it will deal with you. What are the
Absolutely. I think it depends on just somebody's appetite for supplements. A lot of people are very averse to supplements, but also I think like how much you take and how many times in the day you take it. I think if you have a higher need, then that definitely adds to the weight of if somebody should take it or not, like a genetic predisposition.
I think, we get anecdotes of people using it for that kind of thing, using it for ALS, lots of neurodegenerative diseases that might have a mitochondrial component. So this makes a ton of sense.
Yes.
The beauty of CoQ10 is it's everywhere. It's in every single mitochondria. So you need it to kind of like keep like all of your systems going, like all of your organs going. Though I will say some organs are more needing it. The highest amounts of CoQ10 are in your heart, in your liver, in your muscles.
Your
So
brain
that's where you'll see a lot of the benefits.
as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty high in the brain as well. Just, once again, I'm going to point out that CoQ10 does not get into the brain that well.
Okay.
Gonna
Right. That's good
struggle.
to know.
That's like the story behind
What about ubiquinol? Does ubiquinol get into the brain?
a little bit more, but, still maybe not as much. And this is like my whole line of research is looking at what gets into the brain because, for instance, there's like a lot of belief that a lot of flavonoids get into the brain.
They
Not
absolutely do not.
Yeah, it's just one of these things where, a lot of cell culture studies to show that it's got all these great effects for neurons and neurogenesis. Like, who cares? It doesn't really matter. Probably what it's doing is mostly just having a vasodilation effect, having help with blood flow. And that could be helping the brain, indirectly. And so, that's where I couldn't.
Well, how do you know they don't get into the brain?
Because we did tons and tons of studies looking at how much, quercetin or catechins get into the brain and hardly anything. Some of the things that do get into the brain are things like theanine. I don't know if you take theanine.
I do.
Okay. Yeah,
Theanine is in a supplement that I sell, Joe's Mood Daily. But anyway, yeah.
Oh, I did so much work on theanine. I think
Okay.
it's a great pairing with caffeine because it makes caffeine more tolerable. So it helps focus with caffeine so you don't get jittery. But theanine by itself is like great for sleep. It's great for mood. It's working in so many different ways. It's like a really interesting molecule. And then
It
the other thing that I have a pet peeve about is DHA, because once again, everyone's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to take fish oil. It's going to help my brain. And it won't, because most fish oil is in a triglyceride form. It's not going to go into your brain at all. You need the phospholipid form to get into your brain. So yeah,
interesting.
that's my main tip for people is don't bother just getting fish oil, get krill oil, which is full of phospholipids, and that will get into your brain and have brain benefits.
So something you interestingly mentioned with the flavonoids, and so
Mhm.
like I said, I've done megadosing experiments on pretty much every supplement out there, and some of those obviously were the flavonoids. I haven't found almost any of the flavonoids to be really good at getting into the brain, in the sense that I didn't feel it in the brain at high dosages. So that includes quercetin, ficodin, luteolin, and probably some more. Actually, the EGCG got in. I did notice some cognitive effects from it. So
Okay, yeah,
the
that
yeah,
could be
I
because of
don't.
blood-brain folk. Quercetin's an interesting one because this is one that might help you, but indirectly through its metabolites. And I say might because
Mm,
you have to have the right microbiota. So quercetin can get broken down by your microbiome into DOPAC and dihydroxyphenylacetic acid, which are basically like dopamine kind of feedback mechanism metabolite. So they actually trigger your dopamine system to make more dopamine because their metabolites basically said, hey, you lost a whole bunch of dopamine, make more. And so this is where quercetin could have an effect on your brain, improving dopamine, but you would need the right microbiota. So that's like a whole other big area that I'm interested in is how to make sure that your microbiome has the right bacteria in it to metabolize things in the right way so you get benefits.
I've taken the bioavailable, the phospho, the more bioavailable quercetin, but I have to do more experiments on that. What do you think of that? The more bioavailable forms of curcumin, quercetin. Sorry.
Quercetin, yeah, I mean, for sure that helps at least getting into the blood. So,
Right.
because I think most of the time quercetin just gets conjugated and then the liver just shunts it out, and then that's that. So, yeah, having a more kind of bioavailable quercetin with liposomes. I'm seeing that more and more. I go to these trade shows. I think that everyone's putting liposomal, flavonoids into their, yeah, whatever supplements. And I would love to see more of the science showing that this is actually going to be more bioavailable rather than just kind of saying like, we think it will work. So that is one of those pet peeves of mine of like, show me the data. I mean, I will say that, all the data on like the berries, the blueberries showing brain effects. There's this big study that just came out on cocoa polyphenols helping with brain function and, executive function. Like, those make me feel like, yeah, like there is something going on. But once again, I just feel like it's probably a blood brain kind of, like just literally more blood to your brain, like less kind of like, difficulty in getting nutrients to your brain. Like that's really where it makes the difference. And I would say a lot of flavonoids become interchangeable to me. So, I mean, I eat breakfast every day, like a big, huge bowl of berries because I believe very strongly in like tons of green tea and all that. But I'm really thinking about it. And it's like, it's all interchangeable. Some of the flavonoids that I do think are very special are some of the catechins. So those are special. Apigenin, I think is very special. Oh, and then like moving away from flavonoids, I think isoflavones are underappreciated. So those get into the brain, and I think those can be very good for brain health as well. Do you use
Um,
cognitive behavioral therapy at all? Do you use like any of those apps on cognitive behavioral therapy? Yes.
doesn't
No.
work for me.
It doesn't work for you, really.
No, therapy and
I-
of any kind never worked for me. I don't know why.
But I'm so curious how much people could get, synergistic benefits from cognitive behavioral therapy and then right nutrients. So that's all I think that I was just mentioning. It's just this idea of like, hey, if you're looking at ways to increase your serotonin or even, controlling your glutamate, because I totally agree. I think overactive glutamate is a major, yeah, mechanism of anxiety. And this is where, cognitive behavioral therapy plus those nutrients might be, extremely beneficial. So that's the thing that I was hoping at some point someone would come to me and say, like, let's do that experiment or like, let's do that study. I'm still waiting.
I think it was. I mean, for me, it's basically, I would say that that basically happened to me, whereas I started out with already having that cognitive behavioral therapy side of it. And then but I would come to these situations where it'd be like, I'm not in a good mood. I'm not blaming my outside environment. I think it's biological, right? And so, I was very good at not blaming my outside environment. Well, I'm in a bad mood because somebody did this XYZ to me, or I have stress from work. But I still was at a point where it's like, well, I'm in a bad mood or I'm anxious and like it's physiological. I need to change this physiology. And so that's what happened. Once I changed the physiology, everything resolved itself. And there was a whole bunch of other benefits after that that I didn't even anticipate, such as social cognition going up, just things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing that you can just take that stance and step back and be aware that this is just, yeah, like not reflecting the outside world. Because I think a lot of people have trouble with that. And me, like my big thing was that, yeah, like there's a certain time of the month that I would just get like really depressed or angry, or I want to eat a ton, and I wouldn't really realize why. And then like, oh yeah, it's actually my period's coming. And it was so interesting how it just still took a while to realize that was the issue. It was nothing to do with the outside world. It was just literally my break chemistry due to estrogen. So
Right.
that's when I'm really into isoflavones, because I think everyone can control their estrogen type of, emotions due to, these fluctuations in estrogen through something like eating a lot of soy, if you don't like supplements, or, taking genistein or things like that.
Yeah, so I think that it's very easy to blame the outside environment. I think that's the instinct of people. If you're upset, you latch it on to, well, why something in my environment is causing me to be upset, rather than, maybe my neurochemistry is not very robust, right? Or
Yeah.
or it can be improved in any way, in a whole bunch of ways. But in any case, I want to talk about isoflavones because this is something that I've recently been thinking about. Do I want to take isoflavones? I kind of, because I don't eat any soy in my diet, right? And so I kind of was thinking about it. So I looked up the research. It's so unclear about what the hell these isoflavones are doing, in the sense of, like, sometimes you'll see research that shows that it's associated with increased mortality, sometimes reduced mortality. Different populations have different results. It's all over the map. And so what I did was I was just like, okay, I don't eat any soy whatsoever. I'm just going to take like some very, very small doses. Like I put one pill in like my like 10 days worth of my shake. And it's just so I kind of have a little bit of an insurance there, just because I don't eat any soy whatsoever. So I'm curious, like, what you think, like, let's say for men or for, I don't know, like, what is it about the isoflavones that you really like?
So I think once again, they're very responsible for modulating brain energy. And this has been shown like through a lot of animal studies, and it's starting to be shown through some human studies by Rhonda Brinton. Have you heard of her? She
Mm-mm.
does a ton of these studies looking at modulating estrogen-like materials, so isoflavones, to help people, keep their cognition, to stave off Alzheimer's disease. And what I also find really interesting, we're talking about the ITP program, that program that looks at, how long can mice live on a certain molecule. And the most beneficial thing that they have found for the male mice have been these estrogen-like types of molecules that are very similar to genistein and isoflavones. So, in fact, guys can probably get a lot of benefit from isoflavones. I remember talking to my husband about this a couple of years ago, and he had that idea of like, oh no, but that's estrogen that will like make me grow boobs or something like that. I'm like, no, it does not do any of that. I think that kind of stuff is like completely like wives' tale kind of mythology that gets into, the
Yeah,
internet.
I don't necessarily believe in that. So I'll show you here, like just, this is like my notes on the matter. So I take, let's say, 10 milligrams of genistein a day around. But basically, it's like, it's good for there's some studies that show it's good for kidney function, maybe cancer, maybe cardiovascular, bone health, skin, microbiome. It creates estrol from genistein. That's an mTOR inhibitor, increases clotho, DHT inhibitor. Okay, that's all great. Then there's some studies that show lower overall mortality. But then you find like these studies, like high urinary genistein was associated with increased risk of all-cause mortality. And I'm like, oh,
So it's
so
I think it is much better than the negatives, and this is where we just discussed earlier, like things can be complex. Like so, for instance, genistein and other isoflavones depend a lot on your microbiome in terms of like what they get turned into. They could get turned into things that are like not that great or things that are extremely beneficial. So, that is something to be aware of. But what I would say is interesting, at least from the human studies, is that there is a lot of clinical data showing that once you have menopause and you lose your estrogen, the way that your neurons start to use, energy becomes less efficient. And this is where there's a lot of indication that, supplying more estrogen-like material, through isoflavones can help your brain bioenergetics. So yeah, that's I think a really important thing. And I think this is being looked at first in women, but I imagine, just based on some of these animal studies that it could be very similar for men as well. So yeah, so I think it's just a question of like what is it that seems like the gold standard? Epidemiology studies and observational studies, can make these correlations and they're not, these great causation kinds of studies. So I always look for randomized controlled trials. So I will send you a few of the randomized controlled trials on this. And see
okay, yeah, I mean, they're mainly on what the randomized control trials.
on various sort of estrogen like mixture. So Roberta Benton has been working on this for decades, and
But
she's
what are
been
the outcomes? Like, what are the
just
outcomes?
cognition and all sorts of other things to do with cognition, like sleep and mood. So those types of outcomes.
Hmm. And what if somebody already has like a good level of estrogen?
Yeah, then I think obviously if you've got a good level of estrogen, you probably don't need to bring up even more. But, once again, we're all going to age at some point, and this is just something to consider to kind of keep up those hormones. For sure, I find it really interesting that a lot of the kind of like I would say PMS solutions right now and supplements like black cohosh are actually
Hmm.
shown to be, very beneficial for modulating brain energy. So I think that's kind of interesting. So it could be that, even when you're younger, just kind of keeping your brain energy at kind of more even keel will help your mood. But I think more science has to get into that. More actual sort of, clinical studies need to be looked at.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's not good. I actually don't have a position on these isoflavones, so it's interesting to hear meaning. I'm in my mind, it's kind of just
You're
like
looking
I
at
don't.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I like to learn more about it. I don't really have clear. Just kind of expressing my concerns and the pros, the cons, and so it's interesting to hear your viewpoint. I was
I have
yeah.
concerns too. I get, kind of caught up in like, even thing like like choline, which seems beneficial. Well, is choline really just getting turned into TMAO and like that's actually gonna hurt me? Those kinds of things. I also think, sometimes you have to really consider your individual situation. And that's I think what I like about you is that you consider your individual situation and then you also look at all your outcomes to decide if something is beneficial or not.
I had a quick question about SSRIs. I wanted to ask it before, but I forgot about it. So we spoke about serotonin. Somebody mentioned this idea that when you increase you're basically inhibiting the reuptake of serotonin, right? And so it's increasing serotonin in the brain. I would like to know, how is that different from taking tryptophan or 5-HTP, for example? Somebody once said that, like it's different because like tryptophan and 5-HTP are the raw supply of serotonin. And so when you increase the raw supply, it's different than increasing or inhibiting the reuptake, which you're not increasing the raw supply per se, you're just inhibiting the reuptake. I haven't taken SSRIs, like I have them to be able to experiment with them just to see, but haven't had a chance to take them. I'm curious what you think of in terms of like what's the difference between tryptophan, 5-HTP, and an SSRI.
Yeah, I'm going to give you like an analogy just to kind of give you a sense of how to look at it. Like one other thing that, is also increasing dopamine through stopping uptake of dopamine back into the neuron is cocaine, right? And amphetamine. And those are really powerful. You can feel those effects right away. If you take tyrosine, which is a precursor to dopamine, you are not going to feel like you're on cocaine, like even close. So
Absolutely.
it's sort of the same thing. It's basically because, yeah, like your neurons are only going to make, as much serotonin as you supposedly need. Like there's lots of feedback mechanisms. I talked about some feedback mechanisms for dopamine. If you have dopac building up in your system, then it'll tell the neurons, oh, you should probably, make some more dopamine because you've got a lot of this metabolism on our dopamine going on. Let's build up supplies again. And the same thing happens for serotonin. And I think what's really going on, especially, is when you stop serotonin from coming back into the neuron with Prozac, you're actually telling the neuron you should make a ton of serotonin, just a ton. We are missing a lot of serotonin. So that's, I think, what's going on. It's actually funny because this reminds me of a
You should
story I
make,
heard.
or one second, you should make it, or meaning like it when you're taking an
Both.
SSRI.
So it's making serotonin in the neurons, and it's also hitting all those serotonin receptors in the synapse. So it's getting two different mechanisms
But you would
going on.
still need that supply, meaning, or the cofactors. So like, for example, niacin, methylfolate,
Well,
a B6, I believe. Yeah. Well, definitely niacin and folate. They're going to be instrumental in increasing serotonin, right?
yep.
Tryptophan, certain genetic predispositions like TPH2, tryptophan hydroxylase 2. So these are all going to be relevant in increasing the supply of serotonin.
Yes.
So could it get to a point where the brain doesn't have enough raw materials, if you will, that even if it says increase the supply, well, it's just not enough, right? Because there's a competing mechanism here that's creating kynurenine from the tryptophan, or who knows what else, right? There's not enough cofactors here to get it. Like I feel like my whole pathway was like it was just everywhere from the tryptophan was being was being shunted to kynurenine, and then I had a deficiency in niacin and methylfolate, and it's like that whole system was, not
Yeah. It was kinda
giving me
like mixed
serotonin.
and yeah.
So, if I took an SSRI, okay, it could inhibit the reuptake, but is that going to increase the supply?
So this is a good point. Like for sure, some people do not get a benefit of Prozac. And you could be one of them. And it could be because of your genetic state of just, not having all those precursors and the ability to make, serotonin the way that you should. And so maybe Prozac would not work for you as well as it would for someone else who's got, all the genetics kind of intact or kind of optimal. So for sure. But just, usually people, when they take Prozac, like they'll have a pretty strong effect. And, taking precursors, it will not be a strong effect because it's not something where like you have, as I said, very early, like press the reset button in the brain and like made a big impact on your brain biochemistry. You're making like a very subtle impact, and it will take a while to build up the precursors to make serotonin. But like for sure, I think your point is valid that maybe you are going to only get a benefit by taking those precursors rather than something like Prozac.
Okay.
And I think this is what science is really showing us is that we need a lot of different antidepressants to really work in a lot of different people. And it could be that, their malnourished state will make it so that they can't even get the benefit of Prozac. So yeah, that's the other thing to consider.
Also, even let's say, for example, so when you like just thinking about it, I don't really know the answer here, but just thinking about it, let's say it's only inhibiting the reuptake, right? So then you have more serotonin in the synapses, okay. But if it didn't inhibit the reuptake, the serotonin would go back into the neurons. Eventually, would make its way out again, right?
Mhm.
That's
Yep.
still that raw material in there. So I feel like, yeah, I feel in some way it could help in a short term, but like the long term supply is not going to be there if you don't have that tryptophan, that whole pathway. That's kind of That's just kind of what I'm thinking. So I'm wondering if like, what do you think? Do you think tryptophan or 5-HTP works better than SSRIs, just based on what you know?
I mean, for some people, for sure. And I'll give you an example. So like in college, there's a lot of rave culture where I went, and people are taking a lot of MDMA, Molly, and you know how this works, right? So
Yeah.
it's the same thing. It basically causes all the serotonin to go out of your neurons, and it also prevents it from going back in. And then basically this makes it so that you have a huge degradation of serotonin like right away. So you feel great, that night while you're taking it. And then you'll have like that Monday blues where you're like super depressed and you feel terrible. And I would see with my friends, some people had a terrible, terrible reaction. They would feel so bad on Monday. What's an interesting time when you do have a lot of serotonin depletion, and you like this one, is when you're in love. Like when you first fall in love, basically your brain generates a lot of dopamine and is releasing a lot of dopamine. So you get that like obsession and you're having that high, but your serotonin is like way, way down from what it normally is. And that's kind of interesting because I think, for sure, being in love, like those first few weeks, whatever, like you have a lot of ups and downs. Like you're with the person and everything's great. And then you're like away from them. You're not getting that dopamine and you feel actually worse than ever. And you want to be with them even more. So I feel like that's like an interesting evolutionary.
That is really interesting. That is
Mhm.
really interesting. Now that I think about it, I mean, I have some questions there, but like one thing I was noticing is that when like before when my serotonin was lower, I I would like I could get in love like very quickly, and then it's that kind of, you get that like love kind of anxiety. It's like a certain kind of attachment, a certain kind of anxiety that, you want to be with someone, right? Like, and if they're missing, it gives you that kind of attachment. And I didn't realize that that was from low serotonin. But what I did realize was that all stopped when I increased my serotonin levels. So that means that
Right.
I'm much more stable and I don't fall into these things. And like I don't like just yeah, I'm much less likely to, just
Yeah,
fall in
probably.
love much quicker.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah. Hmm.
But on the other hand, it's also that is also negative in the long term, because then you have this like instability, right? Where in certain ways, right, it could be negative, where if you have this low serotonin, it creates these attachments, this dependability, instability of a certain kind of
Bonding even.
relationship.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Whereas now I'm just much more stable, so in that way it's better. But I actually I didn't realize that that was from low serotonin. What about, so here's the question I have for that, the pushback. When if I take MDMA, again, I'm not a big MDMA user, even if it looks like I am now. I find that obviously like one of the things is you can fall in love very quickly, right? Or build attachments, or that is one of the main things that it does. It helps you build emotions and be more emotional and more empathetic. So how does that square away with the low serotonin? Because that is like flooding the system with serotonin.
I mean, it's a difference between like love and I would say friendship. Like I feel like the feeling of affection that you get on MDMA is like, oh, this person really gets me. I'm feeling warm feelings towards them. I don't know if that's necessarily love. I would say what's
Mm.
love is really like becoming addicted to someone. And that you need the dopamine, you need the dopamine addiction. And I would actually even say that you're probably like more stable because you're taking all these serotonergic nutrients, but maybe you're also kind of going like, oh, I'm not having that like high of like falling in love where you're just going whoosh, and you're feeling the intensity of the emotion. It might be a little bit harder to tell, am I in love right now or am I not? And the other thing about, MDMA is like you're feeling the warm, cuddly feelings and then it wears off. And then you're literally looking at that person going like, I don't really know you at all. So you did not get that addiction to that person, which is what like love is really about. So
That's true. That's true. No, I guess I agree with you, because like, yeah, I mean, I think MDMA can help build empathy, build emotions, but yeah, I would say it's different than love. You're not in love. You can build a connection, but I wouldn't call it like you're in love. And I've had once where like the next day I was like, what was what was going on there? What was I thinking? What was happening there? I don't know what was going on. Like, who is this person?
Exactly,
um,
because it's kind of
yeah,
artificial. And it's like, did you
yeah,
really bond, or is it just,
right,
you
right,
felt something and then, yeah, like it
absolutely.
was, yeah, it was not really there.
That's interesting. So you mentioned brain energy, and just to touch on this briefly, I guess we could go a little more on it. You mentioned that mice who have better mitochondria have less social anxiety. I've actually noticed this in my experiments as well. When I improve my mitochondria, it improves mood in general. So it's definitely one of the pathways for mood. So maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say some of the obvious things first that, the brain is the most energy intensive organ of the body, right? It's like maybe like 5% of your body weight, and it's using like 20% of all your oxygen. And yeah, your brain needs energy all the time. And as soon as you basically have like any kind of depletion of energy, your mitochondria start to, become less efficient, then everything starts to break down your brain. And what happens, I think, most of all, and this is kind of fascinating, is that your frontal cortex, which is, kind of controlling a lot of your emotions, sort of understanding the reality of things, right? And saying, like, oh, I see this as an external bad thing happening. It's not anything about me. That requires like a ton of energy to maintain all that control in the rest of your brain. And what's really the problem is your amygdala. Your amygdala can be, active all the time, and it actually has to get kind of like controlled by lots of GABA inhibition. So it's not active all the time. So you're not feeling fear and anxiety. And as soon as your brain energy starts to have, some sort of like problem or insult, your amygdala will start to go crazy and just be like much more active. And this is where, like, I think it's really interesting how the brain works. Your brain will literally do a storytelling when that starts to happen. So, like, you might be doing nothing at all, and your amygdala is being more active, and it makes you feel anxious and fearful. And you can't figure out what's going on. You're just kind of sitting there, and you'll actually look around your surroundings, and your frontal cortex will start to like make a story about like why this is happening. Right.
Right.
And it'll like, say like, oh, because like a black cat got in my way, or because I dropped my ice cream cone and I suck, and I, da, 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 like all that kind of stuff. So I think that's sort of how it works. It's just that, there's one area of the brain, the amygdala, you have to kind of like keep under wraps. As soon as there's any kind of like problem in the way that, your mitochondria are, like they will be more active. And then your cortex will be more active in a way that, is just basically dealing with that anxiety, and also taking that anxiety and making it more concrete. Do you know what I mean? Like making it so that there's a reason to have it. There's a reason to have anxiety, and it's going to happen again. And I'm associating things in my environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I've experienced that before. Like I mentioned, I think the way you describe it is interesting, but it's more like a brain anatomical, right? So, for example, what I was saying is like you have anxiety, and then you try to figure out what in your environment is causing it, right? Whereas
Yep.
basically you're saying like the amygdala is giving you the anxiety, the prefrontal cortex is then trying to figure out, that's the analytical part of your brain, it's trying to figure out why is this anxiety occurring. And sometimes, it goes both ways. You get stimuli from the environment, the prefrontal cortex notices a danger, it sends it to the amygdala, then the amygdala gets anxious and then sends it back to the prefrontal, right? So you get into this loop, you can call it, right? This anxious loop where it's going from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, and you start thinking and getting in your head more, and that causes even more anxiety. You're anxious for being anxious, and so that's kind of, I like the way you described it with the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And definitely, I think like the way to, so the cognitive behavioral therapy takes care of the prefrontal cortex side of it, like not interpreting the incoming stimuli in a way that's threatening, so looking at things in a more objective or logical way, and then the GABA and serotonin is going to hit the amygdala and deactivate it, let's say, and so that it's not creating that anxiety. I do find that both, so I've tested it. Most of my biggest issue was the serotonin. I also did have only when I was under very high levels of bodily and and mental stress did the GABA get lower, right? So I thought of that because I think when you're under stress, your brain kind of blows through serotonin, GABA, and dopamine more. Is that correct? Like
Yeah, it
it
totally does. It
metabolizes them
brings through
quicker.
everything more. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So,
Your brain gets on hyperdrive, serotonin, dopamine, GABA, they get recycled quicker, they get metabolized quicker, and then it kind of, creates a need to increase production dramatically. So I find that, like, for me, serotonin, the best is either tryptophan, 5-HTP, both of them. 5-HTP might work a little quicker, but and then for the GABA, I actually find that all I need is enough thiamine, and that does the job. Increases GABA pretty
actually
substantially.
reading about that study earlier was using a probiotic to control morning cortisol. I thought that was really cool because, like, I think we haven't really talked about cortisol yet, but I think that's another thing. You know what cortisol does? Obviously, it makes you use energy more. It's kind of this thing saying like, okay, you have to like run or do something bad or whatever like that, like use energy, and
Right.
this is helping something really fascinating. The probiotics do this, and also prebiotics do this as well too. Like fiber actually can help with your waking cortisol as well.
Let's start getting into that because you know a lot about fiber, butyrate, mood, appetite. So you work for Noom and you were studying appetite modulation there, and that comes into fiber as well. So let's talk about somebody. I mean, this is kind of a huge problem with society. I'm curious what you think, just in terms of fiber, butyrate, appetite modulation, mood. Just go through that.
Yeah, how does it all come together?
Yeah.
I think it's definitely the case sometimes that people are missing some vital nutrient and they keep looking for it, and that does cause them to overeat. So I think that does happen. But I think, the other thing is just people overeat because they're anxious, right? And it kind of gives them that comforting feeling. And what we really found new was that, people overeat all the time and they didn't like the feeling of an empty stomach. They wanted it full. So we had to really counsel them on having a lot of like high volume foods that's low calorie. But then what we really started to see that made a huge difference was basically kind of giving them like a sort of food based Ozempic effect. And, this is about making GLP-1, this appetite suppressing hormone, go up by eating a lot more fiber. And so, really getting people to put a lot of fiber in their diets to like berries and whole grains and all that. But then at the same time, trying to make sure that they're aware that this fiber, in order to be turned into butyrate, has to have the right microbiome to do that in. So you need these kind of like gut microbiota that can metabolize all that fiber into butyrate, which then can increase GLP-1, which then acts as that appetite suppressant. So, we would actually tell people to go out and take various probiotics. But, as I was telling you earlier, my favorite one is this Clostridium butyricum, which is hard to get. You have to buy it basically from like this Japanese company. But the beauty of this particular probiotic is that it makes sure that you get your gut populated with microbiome that can get all that fiber into butyrate form. And then once you have all that butyrate, you basically can feel like your appetite is controlled pretty much all the time. So I think that's something that people, especially at Noom, really appreciate it, is not feeling hungry. It's like the way that everyone's like, oh my gosh, Ozempic is a game changer because for the first time in my life, I'm not hungry all the time. And I think this is where, you could do the same thing through fiber. It's just that people aren't really aware of like the few tricks that you need to kind of put into place to have that really, strong appetite suppressing effect. So I don't know if you've tried that yourself.
I definitely have. So, I think I've done the most experiments on my body than anyone on the planet, probably. But so I would say that, first of all, I sell a supplement called Joe's Resistant Starch. So as you know, resistant starch is actually, I have not found in my experiments that fiber itself will increase butyrate in a noticeable way. Just personally, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
once again, you have to have the right microbiome and you have to populate it.
so if I take 30 grams of resistant starch, and not all, some of them I find the ones on the market are generally like they're from potato starch and they've got like lectins in them. The one that we have, the Joe's resistant starch, I found that if I take 30 grams of that, I will notice the butyrate, and I know what butyrate feels like. So because I've taken it mega dose with like butyrate pills, and just and based on based on this resistant starch, so it gives me like basically like you feel like this. It feels a little bit like ketosis, right? Or it feels a little bit like lactate as well, where after you exercise, it's this energy source that feeds into the brain. It feeds your gut cells as well, but it feeds the butyrate passes the intestinal cells and it goes into the blood and it reaches the brain.
I mean, that does make sense in terms of, like, I agree, like, you're bypassing the fact that, all that fiber metabolism will, generate gas, all the bloating and stuff like that. But, like, I am firm that if you get enough of probiotics in your system and they're surviving okay, and I would say Clostridium butyricum survives pretty well, that you can build up the capacity to metabolize all that fiber more quickly and more efficiently to the point where you're making a ton of butyrate. Like, it won't happen overnight. It might take a while to like build up that correct kind of microbiome. And, I agree that a lot of the probiotics, especially, some of these lactobacillus things, like they die like immediately. Like they hit your gut and they like last few hours and then they're just gone. So yeah, that is a problem. And it's probably just, looking at the ones that can survive longer, and then you can probably get more benefit from it. But I mean, it is cool to hear that you're getting that much butyrate in and you're feeling an effect, like an immediate effect. That is
No,
pretty
it's not
interesting.
immediate. So just to be clear, it's quicker with the probiotics. With the resistant starch, it takes 20 hours for me to feel something.
Got it.
So
Yeah.
that's around the time that it takes to release, get to the. I mean, when you look at how long it takes, just based on studies, everybody's different. For me personally, it also depends on what else you're doing. For me personally, it's anywhere between 18 and 20 hours to hit the large intestine and start producing butyrate.
Okay. But still, that's not bad because, everyone is aware, of course, ketogenic diet can kind of generate the same feeling of like, oh, I'm no longer hungry. I could give or take food. And it's through the same mechanism. It's the fact that you're generating a lot more butyrate, but that can take days. So I think that the feeling that I'm having is that if there's a way to make that happen sooner, then there's a huge benefit for people because even with people, on Noom that are trying to get that sort of fiber Ozempic effect, that will take a few weeks to really like hit, to really become like an established thing of every time I eat fiber, I will get that appetite suppressing effect for like the rest of the morning or whatever.
So, what do you think about what are some of your favorite probiotics? Like you talked about C butyricum.
So I kind of have this idea, and you probably agree with me, that you kind of want to get your microbiome to look like a baby's microbiome. You
Okay,
want it to
interesting.
look as young as possible. So I actually try to do that. I try to make a microbiome that looks as young as possible because there's so much evidence that, having an older microbiome seems to, indicate that you'll probably have worsening cognition and things like that. So anything that like literally is being marketed for a baby, I will take. I'll take like B infantis and like B longum, all those types of things. Do you take those?
Yeah, I can give you just the ones that I really like. The the ones that I found based on my experiments, I really liked L. reuteri, B. longum, and that's B. longum, B536, B. coagulans, L. plantarum, L. rhamnosus, and I think L. acidophilus. I'm still testing it individually though. Okay, so you mentioned that the fish oil, only in the phospholipid form, does it really get into the brain significantly. Is that true, or am I
Yeah,
representing that
yeah.
correctly?
No, that's
Okay.
that's entirely true. And what's interesting is that when you're younger, when you're a baby, like any form will actually get in,
Okay.
triglyceride form, whatever.
What does it
Once
depend
you
on?
hit, once you hit like 20, 25, it actually becomes way more difficult. So after teen years, this is when you need to get the phospholipid form of DHA or it won't work. And what's interesting is that, for years and years, people kept doing these fish oil studies to improve cognition over people, and they weren't working that well. But then there'd be all those observational studies showing that people who took a lot of fish, like, just were eating salmon, would be
Mm.
getting cognition benefits. And what they figured out is that when you extract fish oil, you're actually taking out all the phospholipids. You're just leaving behind just the triglyceride in the capsule. So all the
Mm.
stuff in the salmon that is the phospholipids just get thrown away. So that's another thing that, people aren't aware of is like sometimes you should just eat the whole fish and you'll get more phospholipids. Or if you're not that into fish, you should just go get krill oil because then they'll have the phospholipids that will get into your brain.
Yeah, I kind of I wasn't sure if that was BS, like some time back, and then I heard some credible people talking about it, and so I kind of thought, oh, maybe there is something to this, and you're mentioning it now again with the phospholipid, like because a lot of things with supplements, like, okay, is this just marketing, right? The phospholipid form, like I know the creatine stuff is like basically marketing, right? They have like 5 different forms of creatine. There's really no extra benefits, but I was just thinking, like, is this marketing? What's going on here? Because I never
No,
really
it's
looked
really
into it, but
true.
yeah.
Yeah. I think there's even a recent study that has shown this in humans that the phospholipid form of DHA is much better. But I will say if you're taking
But
fish
it's much
oil for
lower
mood
though.
effects,
Yeah. It's just much lower in dose, so you have to take a lot more,
yeah,
right?
that's true as well too. But if you think about it like the triglyceride form, like it's probably helping other organs in your body, but if you're really trying to get brain effects, like then you need to get the krill oil or eat the fish. Unless you're trying to get, some sort of mood effect. And this is where you're probably knowledgeable about this, that you need to find something that has more EPA than DHA, because it's really the EPA that seems to have the better effect on mood. So I have to say, like, no one really knows why. I tried to look at the mechanism of why this was, and it didn't seem like people knew why EPA was having that much better effect.
You're saying that it's only the EPA. I guess it makes sense given my experiment, but I didn't know that it was not the DHA as well.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're really doing this for, the mood benefit that have been associated with higher fish intake, then look for something that has a higher proportion of EPA than DHA, and you'll get a much more effect.
So what is the DHA doing? I mean, there's benefits for the immune system, I guess, but like, what are the main benefits of DHA if it's not entering in the brain mainly?
So, the main thing that people are really aware of with DHA is that it helps with membrane fluidity. So you're aware of that, right? That like,
Right.
obviously the more fluid things are, especially, with your endothelial cells, like the better off you're being. You want nice, elastic, blood vessels and things like that. So DHA helps make that like more, more of a thing. But then, there's all sorts of things that DHA gets turned into, all these like resolvents and pro-resolvents and things like that. Same thing with EPA that, are having all sorts of effect on inflammation. And so they're, of course, really anti-inflammatory.
Okay. Interesting. So you're saying that it's a lot of it has to do with, right, the immune system, inflammation. Yeah, I didn't really get. I wasn't impressed with the benefit of just DHA. I thought it would be because DHA is known as like, okay, your brain needs a lot of DHA. I thought, okay, I'm gonna, just take DHA and see how I feel. Wasn't very impressed by it in terms of the brain stuff. But and I think the phospholipid form stuff, I don't think I've ever taken because it's in such a low dosage. You really need to take a lot of pills to really like.
Yeah,
Uh,
you just have to
it,
go
it,
find that brand of krill oil and just, take like 4 or 5 of them. So it's not hard.
right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think I'm gonna start taking more. I have it in my freezer, but I haven't taken it in a while. I think I'm gonna actually revisit it and because I wanted to get into my brain. Let's in the last topic I want to talk about is the supplements that you personally take. So if we could
Mm.
go through a list of those.
Ah, so I do cycle some in and out, depending on like what's going on with me. I obviously take krill oil. We just talked about krill oil and all the benefits of it.
Do you
And
take regular fish oil or just the krill oil?
just krill oil because I don't think I have as much concern about my heart health, or at least I have other ways that I'm controlling my heart health. So I don't really need fish oil to do that for me right now.
Mhm.
But I do love my brain as a neuroscientist. I'm into protecting my brain at all, in any way I can. So then that also means that I take curcumin, I take a bioavailable form. So something that's emulsified, something that has black pepper in it. So that helps get into the brain more. And, curcumin has got anti-inflammatory effects. It helps make new neurons. It's got all sorts of wonderful things that it does. And that's something that I've really got into in the last few years is, I'm almost ashamed to say this is collagen. I religiously take collagen every day, and I have upped my dose again and again. And I first started taking it, I think because I heard it was good for skin health. And I was kind of curious, like, is this true? Let's find out. And then what I really noticed was that my joint felt so much better after running. Like I did not have that
Mm.
pain at all. And I didn't have that kind of like feeling of like, oh, I'm about to get an injury, which was such a problem for me all my life. But to have that suddenly go away was like magical. So I
Okay.
became a believer in collagen. And it's interesting when you see an effect, when you really notice it, then you become in love with that supplement. I feel like that's when you're like, this is the thing that I am really going to depend on, to keep me going. I will say that I take collagen with vitamin C and I take the collagen peptide because, as you know, collagen itself just gets degraded. It's not doing anything. You need to have the peptides that, once again, are doing a feedback mechanism of just telling your body, oh, you've broken down a lot of collagen. You need to make more of it. And that's, basically how I think collagen works, is just telling you to make
Oh,
more collagen internally
and it's
rather than
also giving you the raw ingredients.
yeah, it's giving you the raw
Right.
ingredient. So I think that's vital. And in fact, I always take collagen after a run because I think it synergizes the effect because you're breaking down collagen because you've run really hard. And then you take, collagen, the supplement, and you get like a synergy of your body going like, well, we really should up the collagen right now. So I think that's
Interesting.
huge.
Do you
Yeah.
think that collagen is better than just taking glycine? Because most of the benefits of collagen is probably from glycine.
Yeah, I would say there's more evidence right now for collagen peptides. So if
Mm.
you just look at all the studies, but glycine could be just as good. It's just I don't know if I've seen as much studies. You could send me that, and maybe I will get convinced. So
Okay, I mean, there was one study that I found that made me buy into glycine, which is they looked at people who got sick a lot, and they found that giving them 5 grams glycine twice a day, they either didn't get sick or got sick much less by a very big percentage. Like it made a very big difference. So
okay,
that was
yeah,
yeah, that was like the thing that sold me.
yeah, I'm definitely a believer of various types of amino acids that I sort of cycle through. Sometimes I'm taking citrulline, sometimes I'm taking arginine. It all depends. I do take tryptophan, like obviously once again with an IDO
How
inhibitor.
much do you take?
I take that much, like maybe about like 400 milligrams.
Okay.
No, I don't do a mega dosing thing. I've never been a mega doser. I'm just,
You don't seem like a mega doser.
yeah. I'm like, the
Um,
only thing I've tried to mega dose is collagen. I'm like, okay, once you get up to like 40 grams of collagen, it does not seem like a good idea. So at least
right,
my
right.
gut tells me that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was taking 500 milligrams twice a day. I upped it to 3 times a day. I might go back down to twice. I don't know. Kind of seeing that, but
See how it works. Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah. So,
yeah.
so then I cycle through the isoflavones, especially if I'm kind of noticing my mood is just going bad for no reason. I'm like, oh, I think that's something that I'm very sensitive to.
Why don't you up
Yeah.
your tryptophan in that case?
I think that the tryptophan is one of those things I'm taking all the time. And then the isoflavones I take, is just like a boost. It's an extra boost.
No,
So
I'm saying
that's
when you want an
something.
extra boost, why don't you take the tryptophan? Like more tryptophan.
I guess I'm just noticing more of an effect from the isoflavones as a boosting thing. I will say the
Mm,
tryptophan helps with my sleep more. So I have terrible
mm.
insomnia. I've had insomnia all my life. So tryptophan is helpful that way. And then I also take magnesium, I'm having poor sleep. But then I think everything goes in cycles. Like I actually noticed that I have poor sleep more often in the summertime. I just don't want to go to sleep anymore. And I'm like waking up too early and I'm like existing on 4 hours of sleep. So that's when it becomes, I think, really useful to up the tryptophan and then up the magnesium. And then usually I'm okay for a while. And then
Interesting.
lastly, I don't want to forget, I also take MitoQ.
Right,
And
right. Of
I,
course.
I have to say, I liked MitoQ from like 10 years ago when I was at Nestle and I was looking at this thinking like, this is like the only mitochondrially targeted antioxidant I really believe would probably work, in the mechanism that it's described in. And I took it and I noticed a little bit of effect, but only 10 years later, when I started taking it again, did I really notice an effect of having a lot more energy than I used to and like having less kind of like, moments of just kind of like, oh, I'm done for the day. I don't want to do anything anymore. Now I feel like I can get through the whole day. And if I skip the minor cue, then it feels like I cannot get through the whole day as well. So I know everyone's really after energy right now is like, something they need more of. So I think that is the main supplement I have found works for energy. I don't know what you find works for energy, like just
Oh, I've got a lot
straight
of
up.
stuff, but I just to be clear, I support MitoQ. I think it's a good supplement. Yeah, I would say that I took it for a number of years. I mainly stopped, like I said, just because shipping into Israel is annoying, right? It's just what it comes down to. But like, it's just annoying, right? So but it's something that I would like. I think it's probably kind of like I'm into hedging, so I think like a good idea would be like taking some ubiquinol and taking some MitoQ. Right now, I take, let's say, 300 milligrams ubiquinol a day, 200 milligrams, then 100 milligrams. I think like substituting the 100 milligrams with some MitoQ would probably be a good idea if I could get my hands on it easily. So yeah, I think it's a good supplement. I wouldn't have you on if I didn't think it was a good supplement.
Thanks.
But also you
Thanks,
were
dude.
you, you were just very, I think you know a lot of information. I like bringing people on that I could learn new stuff from, right? So it's like I've learned some new things from you today. So I like that, right? In terms of my energy stuff, just to you asked, I have I have a lot of things, but actually just to be complex, number one, it's
Mhm.
the good B complex. They're all built in different ways, but a good B complex is number one. Niacin, the B complex, they're usually low in niacin. I do well on 500 milligrams niacin. I actually take more for other reasons, like to lower cholesterol a bit, but so I take 1,000 milligrams, but 500 milligrams is a good amount for energy. And I take ergotheanine,
Ah, yeah.
shilajit, gynostemma, NADH, PQQ, acetyl L-carnitine, and a drug called imoxapine. It's like a Russian drug that
Oh, I've heard
it
of that
works.
one.
Yeah,
I
it's a
actually
good one.
went and
It's
bought
solid.
some, and I'm waiting to try it. I don't know what's stopping me, so sounds like
Fear.
it does
You
work.
just need to increase the tryptophan, some 5-HTP, and you'll be a little less afraid. I mean, I am a little crazy when it comes to these things. I don't I when I like people hear me, I try to say like, don't follow me. I would consider myself kind of like an athlete. Like, you're not going to train 12 hours a day unless you're an athlete. I do a lot of things that I wouldn't recommend other people do. And I wouldn't do myself, by the way, if this wasn't my job, in the sense of like I need to understand things better. If I was just like working in finance or something or some other field, I wouldn't do all these experiments. I would just get self decode and see what see what recommendations I should do. Yeah, like but yeah, but those are some of the main things I find, like acetylcarnitine good, PQQ, NADH, gynostemma, shilajit, ergotheanine, and niacin just works. So
Yeah, if you
I
don't
think
get
it's
flushes.
underappreciated.
Yeah. I know a lot of people like they get like that red flushing and then, they're like done not taking niacin, but it
No,
sounds like
you get the slow release though. There's a lot of slow
yeah.
release versions,
Okay.
yeah. And I take some trimethylglycine just to make sure I've got enough methyl groups for there. So, yeah, I would say that's an underappreciated because you read online, it's like, don't ever take more than 20 milligrams or whatever, right? Like, there's a lot of scaremongering there. And it worked on me for a while, but yeah, you get to a certain level of sophistication. And by the way, one of the reasons that tryptophan might not work that well if you're taking it. So tryptophan gets shunted into the NA, like it could go to create NAD through the
Oh,
kynurenine pathway, right? As you know. And I think if you're a lot of people are missing NAD, so I think some of it could be either, inflammation can cause that, or if you're just deficient on NAD, on energy, your body could just be shunting it to create more NAD. So I think that's what occurred to me. Because when I took 100 milligrams niacin, I was like, whoa, this is like a huge energy boost. And so what was happening was, even though I was getting enough tryptophan, I think that a lot of it was being shunted into creating NAD into the niacin pathway, right?
yeah.
And so if you have enough niacin, you can preserve your tryptophan. And so I think both of them are good. And also niacin is going to help you to create serotonin as well.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. That could be what's going on. And you're making me a believer in niacin. I do not take that much niacin, but maybe I will. I've tried NR, I've tried NMN, and I always feel like I don't know if I actually think this is real NMN. I don't trust the random brands I have found, so I
Yeah,
never really found an effect.
I've gotten a couple different NMN brands and NR. I think there's a lot of hype there, right? I think
Yeah.
taking niacin is, I think, much more effective than just, or significantly more effective than taking NMN. I guess I bought into the hype a little bit, but I'm still like on the fence of like, am I gonna rebuy this? I just I bought an NMN that, because one of the problems with NMN is it gets broken down. Like, a lot of it doesn't hit your small intestine. So I got one that is enteric coated, that is gonna get to the small intestine. So I'm gonna see if that works better. But I had to take a gram of NMN in order to notice anything, which,
Yeah, that's a
normally
lot.
it's sold in like 150 milligrams. So I took like 6, 7 pills in order to notice anything, and I think it was like 7 pills. So whereas, just 100 milligrams of niacin, which you get for like a cent, did this, much better job. So I think a lot of it is financial interests by certain people pushing things like resveratrol and NMN. I won't name names, but I think there's a lot of BS and hype there, right? Just to be clear, I don't know. For me, I'm just like, I look at the clinical trials and I'm like, do I really want to take this? Like, what lab markers is this improving, right? What what is wrong? Like, why am I taking this exactly? Am I just taking this because of the hype? And I think the answer is yes. But so I might stop. I'm gonna try the enter code one and see if that makes a difference. But I mean, it does increase NAD, but so does other things. I really appreciate you for coming on. It was quite informative. Learned quite a lot.
That's interesting. I mean, I would say you're amazing for the wealth of knowledge that you have in self-decode. So, like, props to you for having like some of the best information. Whenever I use ChatGPT, like, it always brings me to self-decode is like the main information source that it uses. Just so you know that. I don't know if you're aware.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yep.
ChatGPT, will you ask it what the information sources are? How do you
You
get them?
ask it information about supplement, and it
Okay.
usually tells you something from self-decode.
Interesting, because I was using it and I'm like, a lot of stuff seems very similar to something. They're not. I
Yeah.
was like, oh, well,
Sometimes,
something's
sometimes it
weird
has good
here.
stuff.
I don't know what's going on. But the thing is that I actually, it's interesting to use it, but I actually think that there's a lot of wrong information when it comes to supplements based on how I used it. When I Meaning, like, so like, if you ask what are the benefits of this, it's going to give you some of the benefits, but it's going to mix it with benefits that you only have in animal studies. Whereas, like, on Self Decode, we break it up. Here's the clinical trials, right? And then here's the animal studies. And you kind of don't know what's what in Chat GPT when you ask it stuff, right? So they give you
It's
wrong
not a
information.
human.
Yeah.
It's not like a real PhD scientist telling you about stuff. Like, that is clear.
Right. If it is good enough, I would be like, hey, let's just take all this information, whatever. But the problem is, it's just you need a human still going through it and making sure that something works for something, or, and so we actually have this database on Self Decode of all like clinical trials for a whole bunch of things in the app as well. And also shows you what predispositions like, it shows you how it goes with your genetic predispositions. So like you could type
That
in
one,
any
that is
supplement
great.
or condition, and then you can get recommendations, or you like if you type in a supplement or any kind of recommendation, shows you what it helps with, and if you have those genetic predispositions or labs that it helps with.
No, it's amazing. I think that you guys do that better than anyone else I've ever seen. I know that Nestle, this company of 500,000 people, like they were trying to do that for years, and you guys nailed it so much better than they did. So
I
props to you.
appreciate that. Thanks
Yeah.
so much. So, yeah, where can people find you, or do you have
Yeah,
Instagram or what?
I don't really have like my own webpage or anything like that, but they can read more about me from MitoQ. We have like a blog where we talk about all sorts of things, and sometimes I write those along with my team. So that's always a good source of new information.
Awesome, and I'll keep people updated once I do new mega dosing experiments. Like I said, the ones I did, I liked before, and I took it for years. Recommended it to people. Just haven't taken it for a while because of where I am, but I'd like to try it again, and I will update.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right, awesome. 67% of listeners aren't subscribed to the show, so please don't forget to show your support by hitting the subscribe button now. You'll not only be supporting the show, but also investing in yourself and your health journey, all while helping to keep us ad-free.